G'day, I'm Tim Thompson. I'm really privileged today. Occasionally I get the opportunity to speak to some really intelligent and interesting people. I have one of those right here. I've dragged him in against his will. Dr. John Pickard, our very own Australian fencing expert. John, how are you, mate?
Wouldn't be dead for quids, Tim.
John, you've studied the quirks and the interesting product designs and the technology developments in fencing quite extensively. It came out of your work originally as a botanist for the New South Wales government, and you realised that fences shape our landscape more than anything else.
Oh, most definitely. They're completely fundamental to our view of the land, about property and property rights.
Yep.
But they're more than that. They're also an essential management tool for any farming enterprise.
Because they shape not only the movement of animals, but also the distribution of plants, don't they?
Well, very much so. In some cases, you can pick it up on supplements.
So as a result of your initial interest in the distribution of flora and the impact that fences had on that, you became really interested in fencing technology.
Yeah.
And one of those pieces of technology has been the venerable steel post.
Yep.
Now they've got quite a storied history in Australia, haven't they?
Oh, they do. The first ones that were advertised here in about the 1850s, 1860s,
Yep.
they were flat steel posts, or they were some over-engineered thing imported from England. Then there was everybody was trying to invent a better mousetrap.
Yes.
So we had flat posts, there were T-posts, there were channel posts, there were V-posts, there were bodgy posts, every section you can think of.
And we've somehow settled on this Y shape in Australia, very different to the US.
Yep.
And people in the US can't understand us Aussies. But there's a very interesting story behind these posts, and they're not Australian.
Technically they are, because on the 1st of October 1926, Rylands Brothers Australia, who ran a big steel mill in Newcastle, patented what is now the Star Post.
And where did that design come from, John?
The two inventors were American rolling mill engineers imported from the US by Rylands to modernise their plant. And for some reason or other, they chose the Y-shaped section, the classic style section. But now there were precedents for it in the US. There were earlier patents for that section in the US.
So this had been patented in the US already?
Yeah, but they never seemed to gain commercial traction. And the reason is the Americans settled on what they called a T-post, as in T-E-E.
Yep.
Whereas ours are T-posts. And it's a very different post, a different cross-section, and it has a series of bumps all the way down the side.
Whereas ours has punched holes,
We have
doesn't it?
holes.
You were explaining to me off camera that you reckon that's actually come from the type of wooden posts that are used in each country. Can you explain why Australian posts have holes and American ones don't?
When wire fences first started being built in Australia, it was English technology that was imported.
Yep.
And English fences at the time were massive, and the iron posts all had holes in them, and they pulled the wire through the holes. So, but we'd also done it earlier with the wooden posts, because Australian hardwoods are called hardwoods for a damn good reason.
Yellow box, ironbark, they all have holes bored through the middle with an auger.
Yep.
Wire
and
pulled
if you
through
try putting an ordinary hammer staple, bang, 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 they just bend. So we kept with the holes. And then that translated to the more modern versions of different steel posts.
Our fascination with holes in the posts, and they're always in the wrong spot. I mean, you look at this post here, and like we could get a clip there, clip there, clip there, but we can't get a clip here. The holes in the posts have simply come from our history of using wooden posts and having to drill holes in them because our wood's so tough.
Yes.
And American wood, let's face it, it's a bit soft.
Yes. Their hardwoods don't even come within cooee of our hardwoods. And so why drill a hole through a post when you can use a staple?
It's a huge waste of effort, isn't it? Huge waste
of
time.
Enormous. And so their steel posts don't have holes.
Next up, let's get to the point of something.
Right.
Australian posts are pointed.
Yep.
The American ones aren't.
No, the American ones are chopped off square.
Australian posts don't have a ground plate.
No.
American posts do.
Yes.
Why would you need a ground plate?
Well, according to the American ranchers that I've talked to, they say, why do you need a point on the post? They go in no problem at all. But you've got to have a ground plate, which is it's a funny thing. They're usually a bit like an arrowhead, and they're riveted to the side of their plate. And any farmer knows that if you try to pull one of these out that's been in for 10 years,
Oh, you got buckleys.
you've got to use a lifter. You can't just reef them out.
No.
When I came back to Australia, after working in Arizona, and I talked to Australian farmers, and they say, well, you've got to have a point there, mate, otherwise they won't go into the ground. The ground's too hard. Well, it works for the Americans, and they just laugh at the idea of a ground plate. But the thing is,
It's what we culturally come to expect,
and
isn't
it's
it?
cultural inertia.
Yeah.
We've always done it that way. But I really, really like the American T-posts, because instead of having the holes,
Careful.
instead of having the holes at irregular spacings,
Yes.
and whether doesn't matter what brand it is,
They're all irregular.
they're irregular, although some of the newer posts have holes about every 2 inches.
Yeah.
But most of them don't, whereas the American T-posts have got the bumps on the side at 2-inch intervals.
And no holes at all.
No holes, so you're whacking your post, strain up your wire, lift it up to the right sort of knob, put on a clip. Job done. No feeding of wires through holes.
We've just got to talk to them about their ground plate fascination, don't we?
It's an historical thing.
Who would have thought that such a simple thing as a steel post and a fence could generate such fantastic conversation and such insights into cultural differences, perspectives and heritage?
The post that Ryland's patented is a very good design. The company ran everything from the iron ore mines and the coal mines through the steel mills to the rolling mills, and they had the distribution network. And so it's a very successful post, there's no doubt. There was a bunch of other posts were sold in the 1950s and 60s, and they're still all over the landscape. This was when steel was in very short supply, and farmers, because there was no fencing during World War II, they were desperate to get their fences repaired, and so lots of regional engineering works cold rolled sheet strip into channels or V's or whatever.
Ah, so when you see just a plain V post, that could be from that period post-war.
Yep, from the 1950s or thereabouts.
Okay.
And you don't need a very, very big factory to make one of those.
There's one thing I want to ask you about. It's something that really annoys me. I've cut my hand on it before. No matter how careful you are when you bang them in, you often bend it, and it seems to serve very little purpose. Is this tab up here, now is that really necessary in the post, and was indeed that tab designed simply to slot your top row of barb into, or is that a fallacy?
The big fallacy is that you use the notch to line up the rest of your fence.
I'm sorry, it's not a gun sight.
Well, not only is it not a gun sight, that's rubbish. The first of the flat steel posts back in the 19th century had a notch in the top.
Yep.
And all the illustrations show a barbed wire tied into the top notch.
So it was put there for barb?
I don't know if it was put there for barb, but it was used for barb.
Right.
And right up through all the advertising material up until certainly the 1930s, 1940s, from the manufacturers, shows the barbed wire in the top. More recently, fencers, through experience, have found that having a wire in the notch is not a good idea. If a branch falls on it, it'll break the wire here. So these days the wire is put on the side using a tie and twitching, or any one of a number of clips that are now on the market. So it's got an interesting history, but the big myth is it was a gun sight. No, it never was.
I'm very excited today because you actually have a new book coming out, and
Yes.
I'm keen to promote it.
Yes, please.
Because I'd like more people to take an interest in the history of fencing, because it has so much of an impact on everything else that we do on the land. So we've got this book here, which
Yep.
you've written, and
Yep.
this is going to be fantastic for guys when they go down the pub and they're talking about what they've got in the back shed or who invented what when.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
As Tim said, this is my book on wire strainers, just published. I was privileged, I was given permission to access the Jack Chisholm fencing collection at Museums Victoria. I've been through every colonial and Australian patent for fences. It's hundreds of them, and this is the summary. 270 wire strainers listed in here. I'm really pleased with the way it turned out.
It's a phenomenal book, and when I look through that book and I see laid out before me 150 or more years of history
Yes.
of technology development and landscape management, you start to scratch your head with awe at the people that went before you. And you see the evolution of the tools that we use today.
Yeah. What I find interesting is all the ones that fell by the wayside. Some of it because of a change from steel to high tensile wire. In other cases, they just weren't very practical.
Or other cases, it might have been a 5% efficiency factor, mightn't it?
Yeah.
Now you're continuing, very importantly, the work of Jack Chisholm in that collection. In his collection finished in 1980.
Yeah, it's about 1980.
You're now collecting fencing technology and new products that are being developed beyond 1980 to add to that collection. You're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for public interest.
No.
So if you're a fencing manufacturer out there, or you know a fencing manufacturer out there, and this man turns up, give him your technology, you will end up in the museum and you will end up treasured. And more importantly, you're out all over the countryside looking for old objects, relics, and technology that might not have already been catalogued.
Yes.
So if John turns up at your farm and asks to see your fences, it's not suspicious. He's a very nice man, and if you give him a cup of tea, my God, you'll learn an immense amount about the history of Australia and the history of Australian fencing. So John, we're all going to buy your book now, mate. Well done.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute privilege to spend time with you today. It's been great to finally put to bed the myths around the top notch. Or have we? We'll watch the comments section and see what other people have for ideas.
Yes.
And I hope to do something with you in the future. Would that be okay?
Oh, most definitely, Tim.
Guys, if you like videos like this, don't forget, hit the subscribe button, give it a like, and there's plenty more content like this and more on timthompson.ag. And if you want to get in touch with John, you've got a photo of something special and don't know what to do, hit me up from the website and I'll pass on any details. John, always a pleasure, mate.
Thank you,
Always
Tim.
an absolute
Thank you.
pleasure. Now here's a quick tip. If you are straining to move one of these old bitumen style steel posts that's been rusting in the ground for a few years, here's a counterintuitive tip that might help. Put your post lifter to one side for a minute. Grab a post knocker and counterintuitively give it a couple of thumps into the ground. That'll break up that plug, push it through it, and then you'll be able to pull it back out nice and easily. See? Just like butter.